All right, we are live. Welcome to today's episode of Helping the Brave. My name is Amy T. And I'm here with Ed Parco, my co-host, or
You say that like you don't know me.
I don't know him. He's a stranger to everyone. No.
Well, the person outside your door kind of knows me because they keep staring in at the screen while you're on it. That's okay. She went to the other side, so no big deal. I'm just saying. Anyway, back to the podcast.
Yes, and I'd like to introduce our guest for today. I'm very excited, Susanna, to have you tell your military story. And I wanted to, we'll start off with our first famous question, which is, why did you choose the Air Force?
Well, thanks, guys, for having me. So I grew up as an Army brat, started off as an Army brat, and then I became an Air Force brat. And so when it came time for me to make my own decision, I saw both ways of living, saw both types of military bases, and for me, it was just a no-brainer. But with that being said, after I joined the Air Force, I eventually met my husband who was in the Army. So I married into the Army, even though I joined the Air Force.
Why'd you say it was a no-brainer? What did you? All right, so because I think before the show you told us that you had two different people in your life, two different services, right? What did you learn from each of them that made you make that decision?
Sure. So my dad that was in the Army, he just was a worker bee. He was always gone. He was your model soldier. I used to joke that I thought that he soaked his uniform and starch overnight, because when he walked in his uniform, it was like cardboard. I mean, he was just clean cut, such a handsome man, and just worked so hard and really kind of introduced me to what it means to be a patriot. And then when my parents divorced and my mom remarried into the Air Force, my stepdad, who's also a wonderful man, World War II veteran, and still living, he's 94 years old. He's just always had this kind of classy Frank Sinatra swag about him. And he did it when he was in the uniform. And he just kind of showed me, yes, you can be serious, but you have to keep your eye on the big picture. You can't have such tunnel vision. And so I learned a lot from him. And he's 2 times, probably 3 times retired, just because he won't stop working. So I've just seen the different, I guess, perspectives, one from a military child, but also, coming into my adulthood, those more adult practices, I think, were a direct reflection upon his character to me.
All right. Sorry, Amy, I have another question. What did they each do in the different services?
So, yeah, my dad was I know it's confusing. My Army dad was a warrant officer. I believe he did something with artillery. And my stepdad had a very interesting military career. He actually started off in the Army Air Corps, and literally snuck his way into the Air Force. So he started off, in a job where the Army said, do this. And he was like, no, thank you. What are these Air Force guys doing over here? He literally snuck his way into a different branch. Did dental work, was a medic at one time, had just kind of various jobs. And back then the Air Force wasn't structured how it is now. But my stepdad was also very slick. So he found a way to kind of wither his way into ideal situations.
Very cool. So what do you use today? This is Ed's other question that you use today in your job that came from the Air Force. Like, I know you have a lot of things that came from your upbringing, but is there anything that you learned from being in the Air Force that you use today?
Yeah, and I don't know if I could pinpoint it to one thing. I'd say overall, and let me preface this by saying I was a reservist. So I did, my 6 years in the Air Force Reserves, and then I did my 2 of IRR. And I think being a reservist as well, I didn't come in straight from high school. I had a couple of years of civilian experience behind me before I joined the Air Force. And there are a lot of people when I joined that didn't even know there was such thing as a reserve. One of the things I heard was my recruiter never told me that there was a reserve branch. And I was just thinking, of course he wouldn't tell you, that's not his quota. And so I had that kind of different perspective going into it, whereas a lot of my counterparts, came out straight from high school. That was their only option. And I even during my drill weekends, I was doing my civilian job Monday through Friday, would do my drill weekend. And so I think also when you go straight into the reserves, instead of coming off of active duty and then going to the reserves, you have a little bit more of a big picture perspective or an open-minded perspective. So if someone gives you a direct order, yes, you're not supposed to question it, but in your mind, you're thinking, how could this be done more efficiently? Or, just kind of different approaches to things. But I'd say the biggest thing is just having a big perspective, keeping your eye on the end result.
All right. So did we get into the whole what you did in the Air Force?
I was a medic.
Yeah. We jump ahead? I'm sorry. Maybe I was like, no, because normally people talk about why they joined the Air Force. And then what did you do while you're in? Well, yours is a little different because you're reservist. Reservist, you go through the different schooling and everything, and then you come out, right? And then you do 2 weeks a year, and every other weekend? I don't know. I'm not a reservist. So.
Yeah, no worries. I wanted to be a medic. I always knew I wanted to do something in the medical field. And when I talked to my recruiter, I said, look, I'm only signing up if I have paperwork that says specifically I'm going to be a medic. And so he told me, he was like, this is what you need to score on your ASVAB. This is what type of training you're going to go through. You need to start working out. I was just skin and bones. So you hear all these horror stories about basic training. And I know there's a joke out there that Air Force basic training isn't really basic training, but to me, it definitely was a challenge. So
don't you guys play on the beach all the time?
That was more my deployment. My deployment was laying at the pool. But yeah, I got to be a medic, and I joined, did my tech school training, and I did basic training in San Antonio, did tech school at Travis Air Force Base, and here at McChord Air Force Base, Washington, and at Fort Lewis, which is now JBLM. Got to volunteer for 2 deployments, which was great to volunteer and not to be voluntold. And I honestly, it is, and I knew you hear this a lot, but it has been the best thing I've ever done because it's just put me on a trajectory to such great opportunities.
So do you feel like you learned different things even within the Air Force world deploying with your reserve unit that you wouldn't have gotten had you just stayed reserved and not volunteered?
Yeah, absolutely. The medics in the military have a little bit broader scope of practice than a civilian medic. So you get trained to do more detailed things than you do if I never got to deploy. So things like advanced life support. And you also just, because of the situation you're in, if you go to a deployment area and you're treating a service member, or even if you're treating, the third country national or whoever your patient is, it doesn't really matter. You're just put in the situation where there's adrenaline there, but yet you feel calm because you've had this training, and the Air Force just does such a good job of putting you through training that is as close to real world as possible. And I know that's probably a joke to a lot of other people that are listening in, especially a lot of Army and Navy corpsmen, because I know that you guys, in my opinion, have it so much more in the weeds. And we were always inside the base. We never went outside the wire, so the patients were brought to us. But I definitely feel like just having that exposure and then coming back home, it makes you more appreciative to not only be born in the United States, but to serve with people of different backgrounds who might be complete strangers, but you guys all join the military and you guys all have this calling to serve this bigger purpose and be a part of something greater than yourself. Whereas I think I was just a traditional reservist, I'd probably just be like, oh God, this is another weekend, let's just check this box and get my pay and go home. But deploying is just such a, I guess, rewarding experience. Even on your worst days, you know that you're going to go home.
Yeah, but does it help the fact that your family was in the service, that you kind of have that patriotism, that whole thing behind you to start with?
Oh, okay. I'm sure it does. I don't know if I would have joined the military without my upbringing. And I'm always amazed when I hear people that are first generation military, but the one thing is the same. They always talk about this calling. Like, I knew I wanted to do something great. I knew I wanted to do something awesome. And I felt like the military was the only way to do it.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's funny or interesting finding first generation service members. Like, that's so crazy because a lot of us come from generation after generation. I mean, it's the same way as dad, his grandfather, me, all my uncles. I remember somebody asked me how many veterans were in my family, and I'm like, oh, I don't know if I can count that high.
Right. It's like Lieutenant Dan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because both my dad and my uncle were Air Force, and then my stepdad was Marine Corps, and then my grandfather was World War II, so pretty old. So.
Yeah. So we also like to talk about our transition out of the military stories, and I know yours is different, which is great to even hear. Was there a transition process when you decided your 6 years was up, or was it just thanks, hey, awesome job?
Before you answer that question, because we've never had just a reservist, and you're our first just reservist, so we got that box checked. No, it just, how does it different? We have no idea how that works, because myself, I got out and then I had to do the inactive reserve, right? And so how does it work as a regular reservist when you get to that point, just like Amy asked?
Yeah, so our unit, which was the 446 ASTS at the time here at McCord, was a very close-knit unit. So when someone got out, there was a party or a barbecue, and, or we'd go to the Air Force pool on base or go play golf and celebrate, and get presented with awards and plaques, and people just go up and share memories that they have with you. And it's a celebration, but there's no transition assistance program. And keep in mind, I only did that 6 years. So if I would have stayed in for 20 years, I'm sure it would be different. But because you are a reservist, you have that civilian job that you're doing Monday through Friday. So your transition is kind of just, oh gosh, I have a weekend free. It's great. I can actually do something now. I don't have to worry about planning that annual tour 2 weeks out of the year. So it's kind of just freeing up time and just looking at what your next venture is. The great thing about being in the medical field is that you end up working with a lot of the people that are in your reserve unit, whether it be medical admin, physicians, nurses. You see all spectrums of how healthcare works, what the similarities are to military medicine, and what the differences are. And then you can take what you learn in your civilian job and try to make improvements in military medicine, which I think we all can attest to over the years. Hopefully has improved, but unfortunately there's a lot of bad stories out there as well. Being a civilian, I never had to rely on military medicine, but my ex-husband was a physician, and one of the things that used to always catch us by surprise is people would say to him, so you're a military doctor, what are you going to do when you get out of the military? And he'd be like, I'm still a doctor, an MD in the service is still an MD out of service. So I think it's being able to educate the civilian on how intelligent the military really is and what they bring to the table.
I just think they were probably used to, most doctors build a practice over years and then, they get out and retire, not get out of a military and then have to start all over. So I don't want to say it was a stupid question, but I understand where he would come from with that question. But now what are you doing now? Because don't you relate what you do now for vets?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple, I have my hat in I wear many different hats, and my civilian main job is I am a director of business development for a company that does clinical research compliance. And a lot of clinical research does take place with the VA. So our company, and when I say our company, the company that I work for, basically ensures that pharmaceutical companies or whoever is sponsoring this study is following the FDA rules and regulations to protect human subjects. So that's my main role. I also am a volunteer writer for a female veteran magazine called Freedom Sisters, and the publisher, her name is Carrie Jeter. She's a prior service Army PAO, so that's great. All of the writers and contributors are female veterans, and all of the content is geared for female veterans. And then I also am a vice chair for the Seattle chapter of Women in Bioscience, which is just a designated organization to try to recruit and bring more awareness to women issues or aspiring or accomplished women that are contributing to the bioscience field. And then at the local level, I decided to run for city council here in DuPont. So my weekends are full of campaigning and playing golf with Amy whenever she can.
You have nothing else to do? Why don't you go hit your head against the wall? That'd be more fun than running for city council.
Well, when you're single and you don't have any kids,
I got some free time.
You have lots of free time, and it's great to live in DuPont because 70% of our population here is military affiliated in some way.
Well, that might not be so bad. What I'm used to in my town. They're always fighting. So
we have a little bit of that too. Yeah.
I'm going to say DuPont is a special place. It's not like anywhere, I don't think, in California. It is very military. It's, to me, like I say, Pleasantville in the most possible way. Like there's not a bad part of town. There's not, it's just, it's a really neat place. I don't live in DuPont because, I don't know that they would like the weightlifting that my family does at all of the hours that my family does it in. So I've already decided that I always need to have a little bit of property. But DuPont is a neat place. And so I can't vote for Susanna, or I would. I can say that.
Amy.
But so we'll go taking it back to doing all the things with veterans. I didn't know that you were a writer and did all that, so that's really neat to learn about. So if there were ways for female veterans in our area to get involved in one of your, so even say the bioscience, that's fabulous. How would they do that, or what would their path go to learning more about it?
Yeah, so Freedom Sisters is on Facebook. There's a website. It's an online digital magazine, so anyone can subscribe to it. You just download the app. It's really great content. It's kind of an escape. Running for city council, you find yourself having to watch and select your words very carefully. And as a writer for a female veteran-based audience, it's my escape because I can really relate to that. But also it's information that is helping other female veterans. And for Seattle Women in Bioscience, there are multiple chapters across the United States. So I would just Google Women in Bioscience and contact your local chapter. One of my initiatives specifically is we talk a lot about, and I'm sure everyone's hearing a lot about, diversity and inclusion and equal representation within multiple industries. So one of my initiatives is trying to incorporate and recruit more active duty service members or retired service members that are working in healthcare, because that demographic often gets left out of diversity and inclusion.
Very cool.
I was looking at your magazine. You guys had the mutt sauce lady, which we had on the podcast too.
That's awesome.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So let me think.
You have to think for a question? Come on.
I do. Okay. And
So on the Freedom Sisters, I want to go to
the.
the Freedom Sisters. All right, we'll go there because you're part of that. What articles are you looking for? What are you looking to put in there for? Because you said women veterans, but is there a certain type of articles you guys like to find and write and that kind of stuff? And if so, if somebody wanted, if they have somebody, so I'll let you start and then I'll add to that question.
Sure. So our publisher, Carrie Jeter, does a great job. We have a yearly plan of what the monthly issues are going to be and what we want those topics to be. And then we as writers get to volunteer for those specific articles. So the theme in the article you'll see is the word her, H-E-R. So it'll be influence or contribute her. So we can find female veteran contributors or influencers to share what they're doing. We also share about how we overcome obstacles. For me, it's quite unique because there's some things I can't relate to. And it's just my truth. There's a lot of articles about PTSD out there and sexual harassment and sexual assault. And one of the questions that I always get asked as a female veteran, which is kind of a shame, is, oh God, were you ever sexually assaulted? And it's very sad that someone assumes that just because you're a female in the service that you were probably a victim of sexual assault. And yes, I will attest any statistic for that is too many. 0.01 is too many for that to happen. So I try to contribute or select articles that talk about positive things because I had a great experience. I've been very fortunate and blessed not to have any negative experience being sexually assaulted or being outcasted just because of my sex. But then again, this magazine is a great platform because it does share stories of the women who unfortunately are victim of that. So it gives us a voice where we don't have to be politically correct. It's just basically our truth and sharing that truth with everyone else. And I think just getting the word out and then people feeling empowered to reach out to your local senators and your congressmen, that goes such a long way. And I think now we're in this environment where it's just easier to post a bad review on Yelp or post a bad review or go on a rant on Facebook instead of contacting someone who can do something about it or verify a source. And so these little embers of false truth can spark flames that really instill like fear mongering in people. So it's been very empowering. The feedback from the readers is that, hey, I feel empowered. I didn't know other people were going through this or have gone through this. So it's great, but it's also giving us ideas on how we can present solutions for the things that female veterans are going through.
Right. Because I know female veterans who've been sexually assaulted in the military. So there are a lot of them out there. I'm glad you weren't and other people weren't, but I'm just saying that fortunately that is something that still needs to be addressed everywhere. I mean, it's even in our government, right? So,
yeah. And I appreciate that, you don't try to speak in areas that you just don't feel aligns with your own personal story. I think it's powerful to let the right voices come through, and that's very inclusive as well for you. You know what I mean? To go in the areas that you feel more comfortable with versus feeling like you have to voice everything about everything. I think that's neat.
Yeah, thank you. And I do get questions a lot of high level general questions where, people will say, how does it feel? Or what was it like to be a Korean in the military? And I'm like, I can't relate to that because one, I'm only half. Two, I was born in Texas and I probably had one of the most American upbringings ever. And yeah, I eat kimchi, but it's not like it was in my MRE. And so I can't relate to a lot of questions that I'm asked.
Well, and I think those questions sometimes, like, you've never been anybody but yourself. So how can you know the difference of?
Yeah. And even for city council, people will ask, oh, well, you'd be one of the first, Asian Americans. And to me, it's just like, we are all Americans. It's great to celebrate what makes you different, but I think it's more important to celebrate what makes you the same, whether it be a common goal or just the fact that you want to do something or be a part of something bigger than yourself. And, I don't think that I definitely feel like I don't have to use that as oh, okay, I meet this box, so I should do this, or I check this box, so therefore I should speak on behalf of all of this demographic. And yeah, like you said, Amy, I can only speak for myself. I can't speak for all half Koreans out there that are in uniform.
I actually didn't even know you're Korean. So.
Yeah, well, and it's, I think that's a funny thing for people. Like, do you know what my somebody, I heard somebody ask, well, what do you think my nationality is? And I'm like, oh, see, I don't play that game. Because anybody can be anything, not to say that they're not DNA that way. It's just what somebody appears like is not necessarily what they are. And I just don't know how you win in a conversation like that versus if you would like to share your demographic with me, I'll share, mine with yours. But it's, or what people are trying to go for, where the conversation they feel is going on why that's important.
Yeah. And I think with veterans, especially in the military, it's not, most veterans don't care. And I don't mean that rude, but it's like, you're a person. That's all we care about. You're here to do a job. I'm here to do a job. Let's get it done and move forward. And that's, I can come from a background where my dad was a bigot. I'll tell you that right now. He was, and luckily he was gone when I was 12. Otherwise I might have turned out to be something else. But you have that thing in your life that you learn. It's a learned thing. It's not something that you were born with. So, because we had somebody on here and I told her that, and she's like, well, how'd you get away from that? Just like, luckily he passed away. So.
Yeah, right. I think that's, we could go down a different.
Well, I'm not trying to, I'm just saying that for me and it's just shocking that people have been in the military, older people, and they have different thoughts and different things they say. We've had older people on and I say older than me, of course. And they say things differently than we say today. And it was a different generation at the time, and we're in a totally different generation now. And so there's a lot of things that are different. And all I'm saying is, for most veterans, you put on the uniform and that's what you are. You're a vet.
Yeah, you lose your, whatever makes you different when you put on the uniform, it just instantly makes you the same.
That's why they cut your hair the same.
Luckily for me, I didn't have to get the buzz cut.
Well, for guys, they all look the same when you walk out. That's funny. When we were at my son's boot camp graduation, and actually it was AIT graduate. No, it was airborne. He's running, and my wife's like, "Oh, Blake, get your mom. I love you." And it was some other kid because they all look the same.
That's funny.
Yeah. So anyway, we'll move on. And by the way, I have kids. My 3 kids I adopted with my wife are Asian. You wouldn't know it, but yeah, they are. So there.
All right.
There. I just want anybody write in that I'm a racist or whatever because I said the thing that I said. I'm just saying it doesn't matter to me. Yes.
So when I was in the Army, I was one of the first women in light infantry at Fort Drum, New York, and they had me shave the back of my head so that I would look the same when we were running.
Just the back of your head?
Yeah, because I could put my hair up in the cap, but the back, this part, was shaved. But it was,
which they couldn't do today.
Yeah, no, I was just about to say it was a different time. Yeah. It was, 30 years ago. So.
Damn, you're that old?
Haha.
Anyway, so this is enough about us messing around, but basically your story, you use the military for what most people should use it to get education, use it to get a career. That's what it's there for. You give to the government to be there and sign on the line for so many years, but you need to get something out of it. And it seems to me like you did get something out of it and you used it the way it was supposed to, or you used your husband's. Right.
Yeah, I did both actually. So my ex-husband and I are still great friends, and so I used my GI Bill, my post 9/11 GI Bill for my first deployment, and he was kind of, he's an MD. He's like, what else am I going to do? So he had his GI Bill, and I was like, well, I already have this degree, so I might as well get something else. And that also is just such a great perk of being in the military, is that flexibility to pass along that GI Bill. And yeah, it's just been great. And I'm definitely not done. Like right now, I'm going to be partnering with a group of 5 retired Army officers. And the gentleman's name is Bob, and I'm excited. I'm going to meet him on Wednesday. But we're going to talk about, the lack of the military voice and the voting system. And we're going to start tackling some of those issues as far as why are our military service members not receiving their absentee ballots? And if they are receiving those absentee ballots, why aren't they using it? Why do they? And of course, because of today's current events with the indoctrination of what they're attempting to do with our service members, your vote is one of the last things that you're going to have left, as far as being able to make yourself independent. And depending on who you ask, my dad's very old school, and I still kind of feel this way as well, is when you agree to join the military, you are giving up somewhat of your own identity, to conform. You take the oath to follow the orders, but you still have your personal beliefs, and your vote is one of the few ways that you can express and support your personal beliefs. So we're going to start looking into that in a more in-depth way. I look forward to not exposing, but just kind of identifying more problems and tackling each one of those problems so that our service members are, one, getting those ballots, and two, using them. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there about, well, I can't vote here, or I can't register to vote because then it's going to impact my home of record, or, I'm going to lose my BAH or my educational preferences in this state, et cetera. So whether that needs to be, dispelling the misinformation that's out there, or trying to get some laws changed so that it's more supportive of the military service member being able to be heard through their vote.
Well, only thing I was going to say is my son got 3 of his. So last time, he had 3. Yeah.
3 voters pamphlets.
Yeah. 3 voting to vote. 3 of them ballots to him from California. Yeah.
So I would say just food for thought for that. And I'll preface this with, I was a manager of a credit union on JBLM, and I wonder what the impact or the thought is
okay?
on including the spouses in your conversation that you're going to have, because as we've known that the spouse that doesn't serve is oftentimes the financial person, I wonder if they would also be highly influential on whether or not someone votes. And one of the things that I thought was really crazy is so many, and it was predominantly female spouses that worked for me, who were just not interested in learning about the voting process, felt like it was just too much hoopla and different things like that. And so I took it, the credit union that I worked for, the CEO was like, everybody should vote. And, we tried to do everything nonpartisan. So, we're not going to share who we vote for. We're not asking you who you vote for, but we really do think that you need to educate yourself, because it's such a powerful tool to use. And so just food for thought is that maybe figuring out how to tie it into the military family might help.
Yeah, thanks for that, Amy. That's the power of the military spouse is amazing. Often, and they're so good at OPSEC, right? Like, you know things kind of before it becomes public information, and once you have that information, you just keep it to yourself. So I admire that about the military spouse, and yeah, absolutely, they are indirectly wearing that same uniform as well. And then to be able to have your children involved, or just have that education to, hey, as soon as they turn 18, make sure that they get registered.
Right. Yeah. And not only registered, but learn how to read what they're put there. Because what happened here in California is they put a name of something, a safe neighborhood program, which had nothing to do with that. It had to do with letting felons out of prison early. And then we had a gas tax, and and it wasn't voted on. So they put it back on the ballot to be voted on. And in California, most people just vote no on a tax. They won't read it. They'll vote no. The problem is you needed to vote yes to get rid of it. So that's when voting has consequences. You need to be okay with your vote matters. And when you vote, read what you're voting for. And the reason I'm bringing this up is I bring it up on my radio show all the time, because we had politicians on. We have the sheriff vote coming through next year. It's important. It's a right. And I can't believe how many, and no offense to your women, but that don't vote. You guys burned bras back in the 60s to be able to, and now it's like, or 70s, whenever it was. And most women don't vote. You guys fought for that right. Right? Should I get off my soapbox? Sorry.
It's an accurate soapbox, Ed. I go door knocking as part of my campaign, and I come across so many military families that say, I'm not registered to vote here. And I'm like, okay, well, do you at least vote at all? And I'm surprised at how many people actually say no. And so to me, it would make sense if you're going to be stationed somewhere for at least, 3 years and probably longer now due to COVID, that you want, especially at a local level, a lot of the things that you're voting for at the local level, you'll see the solutions for or problems as a result of your voting almost instantly. So yes, I totally agree. You have to vote, but you have to know what you're voting for, and you have to do the research. And I've learned so much in this campaign. Even with my candidate statement, I was limited to, I think it was 250 words or so. And they give you a guidance on, this is what your candidate statement should look like. And so I was comparing myself to other candidates and, did a little blurb, and that's fine. But in hindsight, I probably would have done things differently. So it's good to also talk to people about, how do you feel about this issue? What are your sources? Which I think is the biggest one. I can't say that enough. And that comes from just being in the healthcare background, is there's no room for subjective information when it comes to a lot of things. You have to make sure that you're looking at verified sources. And with social media these days, it makes it very hard. So I would say, don't just look at one source. If you watch one news channel, don't just look at what that news channel is saying. See if you can find some actual publications about the issues that you're voting on.
I agree.
Yeah, research.
Well, and I'll say, like, my 3 kids are all registered to vote, and are really good at researching and different things like that. My husband is really just wanting to match what I do, which what I decided to do a couple years ago was I would put my ballot out, and then I would tag different things, because I still want him to understand, like, I don't want him to just vote the way I vote, because he considers that I did the research and we think the same, which we might not in every scenario, that kind of thing. And so
you guys do
like easy tags, because I wanted him to vote for or do it himself. You know what I mean? But
a great point is to also, when you're teaching, some of my best mentors have taught me in the way, like, this is how I'm teaching you, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's the only way. And the best mentors teach me how to challenge them and teach me how to challenge them. So to also be educating in a way to where you're discouraging that groupthink process, right? Like,
right.
Just because I am, having a conversation with one person doesn't mean I necessarily agree with them, but I can collaborate with them and have a dialogue with them to at least maybe have an open mind and maybe get my mind changed. I mean, at the very least, if my mind gets changed, I know it's going to be because I was open-minded, because I checked sources, but also just being open enough to learn something that's maybe outside of your normal perspective.
Right. We had a guest on who he's real big now on getting veterans involved in politics and pushing, because he feels that veterans, it does, even whatever party you're with, you learn to work with people, period. You'll listen to both sides, and it's not emotional. It's logical instead of doing everything emotional. And so he's somebody you should contact, and I'll tell you who he is when we get off.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Well, and I will say, I do think, like, when you do it kind of the way you were saying, and that's what I was trying to do with my husband, is he found in language that I got it, the way I understood it was the opposite, sort of like what Ed said. I voted yes on something, and it had to do with handguns, and he was like, nope, I think you got it wrong. And so then I reached out to someone. I'm like, this is how I see this verbiage. And they agreed with Mark, and they said, nope, this is how it's written. If you vote this way, it means that. And I'm like, well, that's stupid.
No, that's tricky.
But, right. But it was funny, but it was,
not funny.
it was ironic, I guess. But Javon was with us, and he's registered to vote, but before, before he turned 18, and he was like, that was interesting. And so, the kids around got to see the discussion, and it's powerful.
Yeah. I mean, most people don't think about, if you don't vote, don't complain.
Right. I think Eisenhower, had that "don't vote, don't gripe" was one of his slogans, I think.
In the clinical research world, when you volunteer for a clinical trial, you have to go through something called a consenting process. And that consenting process can be filled with medical terminology, 4 to 5 syllable words. It's not for the layman. And so what a lot of institutions have started to do is actually take that consent process and literally turn it into 5th grade language so that it's simple. And I think if they did that in voters' pamphlets on issues as well, it would also help people understand, okay, this is asking me for a yes or no for cause A. If I vote yes, cause B will happen if I vote no. And it really needs to be that simple.
I agree. I think Ed and I's friend that he's going to have dinner with says clarity is king.
Does he?
I think he said that once.
Oh.
You could ask him tonight.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things, voting, I steal the phrase from Obama, voting has consequences, which it does. So please read what you're voting. Please vote. I don't care how you vote, but make sure you're voting the way you really want to vote for.
And ask your local JAG office if you're active duty, or go on website. There's the Federal Voter Assistance Program, FVAP website, which is full of great information. And I'm hoping when I meet with these gentlemen on Wednesday to have additional resources as well.
Well, we'll have to have you back on so you can tell us that information that you've had.
Yeah.
And you can be our voting person for vets.
I would love to. Yeah.
That would be cool.
Yeah, because I mean, it's very important because, this last election, there were so many vets voting for one way, which how could that be? Nobody understood that. So I don't know whether it was right or wrong, but we need to make sure that each veteran is actually getting their, like you said, their actual ballot if they're out of the country or wherever they are absentee, so they can vote the right way, their way. So.
All right. Well, I think we'll wrap up unless anybody has anything else.
Thanks so much, guys, for having me on.
We appreciate you being on.
Yeah. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button, and we will be back on Thursday. We hope. I can't remember.
We will.
I'm hoping.
All right.
Anyhow.
Well, we're normally Tuesdays and Thursdays unless there's been a cancellation. Stuff comes up. So.
Very good. All right. So I'm going to hit the button, guys. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thanks for being here.